If you're new here, this is Weirdly Aligned. If you're here and you came across my channel, obviously we are weirdly aligned in some way. I believe that, you attract and you come across certain people because obviously you're vibrating and are on the same frequency, or maybe the universe wants you to hear a message, or vice versa, whatever the thing is. I'm so happy that you're here, and I hope that you subscribe if you're into conspiracies. Going through CIA documents, learning about the spiritual awakening, the stages, just all kinds of things, and decoding the Bible, that type of stuff. This is definitely the channel for you. So please, if you'd like, subscribe. And yeah, I'm gonna read off my notes today. I try to make it super organized to where I'm not just going all over the place, bouncing from one thing to another. It's gonna be a very hot take today, a very touchy kind of subject. Because one, we've all gotten vaccines, right? All of us, from the time I was little, we always had to get vaccines before we could even do anything. We couldn't even go to school without getting vaccines. And so I get that when these things are something that applies to our own life, it's almost like we want to be like, no, I don't even want to hear about it, right? These blinders, because it's just hard to hear. But yeah, we're definitely going to get into that today. We're going to talk about the chemical, biological warfare experiments that were going on. And I didn't get my daughter vaccinated. I chose not to. I kind of learned about this stuff 6 years ago, and I debate on whether I want to talk about these things or not, just because I know that there's so much backlash that can come from it. And like I said, it is a very touchy subject. But yeah, let's just get straight into it. So after World War II, under Operation Paperclip, the U.S. government brought over 1,600 Nazi scientists, engineers, and doctors to work on military and scientific projects. While many were instrumental in developing the U.S. space program, others were directly involved in the development of biological and chemical warfare. Among the most infamous of these scientists was Dr. Hubertus Strughold, known as the father of space medicine. But he had a dark past. He had been involved in conducting experiments on humans at concentration camps, such as exposing them to high altitude decompression to study the effects on the body. And a lot of these documents, and I'm going to link all of the documents in the description so that you can just go and read them yourself. It is dark, and I watched these interviews with these people that did these experiments, and they kind of have no remorse, and I honestly think it stems from maybe they had to go through something during childhood, but they truly have no remorse. They talk about how, the ends justifies the means, and how it's worthless people that they do these experiments on, and so many cold things that they say. It really does take a certain type of person to be able to continuously do these type of experiments. And I just want to make it clear that our world is filled with those type of people, right? The duality. Not everybody is just going to be full of light, and but yeah, okay, so just to get back into it, these scientists were not just brought in to build rockets. Many were put to work in biological and chemical warfare programs, and their research led to the development of more advanced weapons, including biological agents like anthrax and botulinum toxin. They were also involved in creating vaccines to counter these agents. The U.S. military, fearing future biological warfare, began testing chemical and biological agents on its own population as part of a larger military initiative. Okay, the legacy of Operation Paperclip set the stage for many of the CIA's covert programs during the Cold War. The knowledge these Nazi scientists brought to the U.S. helped fuel a series of unethical experiments involving humans. These experiments were justified under their guise of national security and defense, yet they often involved grave violations of human rights. The government's biological warfare experiments on civilians, we had Operation Sea Spray. One of the most infamous experiments, Operation Sea Spray, was conducted by the U.S. Navy in 1950. The operation was designed to test the effects of biological agents in an open air environment. The Navy released large quantities of Bacillus globigi, a bacteria that is harmless to healthy people but can cause illness under certain conditions. This experiment was conducted over the San Francisco Bay Area, but the military's aim was to simulate how a biological agent could be dispersed across a large urban population. The Navy's experiment exposed approximately 800,000 civilians to the bacteria without their knowledge or consent. The result was numerous people becoming sick with respiratory infections. The Navy claimed that the bacteria released was harmless, but many later became seriously ill. Some even linked the outbreaks to the spread of pneumonia, which killed several individuals. Okay, so just to stop right there and talk about it for a second, I said this when COVID happened, and this is not factual, my own opinions. Every single day, they're spraying our skies. Every single day. There's barely a day I go out and I don't see the chemtrails and see them spraying. And this is truly how I think. And these documents say that they did this back then, so why would they not be doing it now? I think this is how they got COVID to spread so fast. I think this is how they get everything. Out of nowhere, everybody just always gets the same sickness across the world at the same exact time. They push it out all over the news, propaganda. Everybody goes and gets these vaccines. I think 10,000 people last year died from the flu vaccine, which is honestly insane to think about. That shouldn't be happening, period. But an example was from that one was later documents revealed that this experiment was just one of the many tested effects of biological agents on civilians. Following the operation, an outbreak of pneumonia affected hundreds, and many blamed the Navy's release of the bacteria. Okay, another crazy one. This one is just like scary. Operation Big Buzz in 1955, which was another disturbing experiment in which the military used mosquitoes as vectors to spread diseases. In this operation, the U.S. Army tested how many mosquitoes infected with yellow fever and dengue fever could be spread in an area as a form of biological warfare. The goal was to elevate how the diseases could be weaponized and dispersed across populations. Okay, I know y'all have heard about Bill Gates and the mosquitoes, and I honestly find it so weird and crazy. It makes me so scared. Even just recently, we stopped having mosquitoes here in Houston, and then as soon as it started getting cold, the mosquitoes are supposed to be here. I was sitting outside one night and I just started getting bit up, and then my daughter as well, she came back from her dad's and she was bitten up, and I was like, what is happening? Why did these mosquitoes just come out of nowhere? And I'm not saying it's the same thing. I'm just saying the mosquito thing is very scary to think about, how we just truly don't know. We can't even walk outside without feeling unsafe in some way, or me anyway. And these things really get scary. I can't believe that was happening in the 1950s, right? Y'all infected mosquitoes and then released them. What? You thinking in the 1950s that black and white TVs, barely any AI or anything, but that's what I'm saying, that when you get down and deep into this stuff and just go down so many rabbit holes, you truly understand that everything that we've been told is a lie. And it's not to say that this stuff isn't happening to this day. These documents weren't released until just a couple years ago, and this was happening over 100 years ago. So the same thing could very much be happening now, and that's just what I want to make people aware of. And I think that the smarter we become about this stuff, and the more aware and just how we see this stuff happening, I think that it really changes the way that we go about life and start to look at conspiracies. And, I think it's the year for the come up for us that believe in conspiracies. I think everybody's going to start jumping on the bandwagon and realize that, wait a minute, no, this stuff is actually happening. But okay, my bad for just stopping. I just have so many thoughts on these things. Okay, but after Operation Sea Spray, after Operation Big Buzz, we had the Tuskegee syphilis experiment in 1932 through 1972. Do you see the year 1932 through 1972? That is crazy to me. So perhaps one of the most infamous and morally reprehensible experiments ever carried out by the U.S. government was the Tuskegee syphilis study. Conducted between 1932 and 1972 by the U.S. Public Health Service. In this study, 399 African American men in Tuskegee, Alabama, were deliberately denied treatment for syphilis for 40 years, even after penicillin became the standard treatment for the diseases in the 1940s. The men involved were told that they were being treated for bad blood, a term used to describe various ailments, but they were never informed that they had syphilis. They were actively denied treatment and were subjected to painful and unnecessary medical exams. The study continued even after penicillin was discovered. So with that, who do you think infected these men, right? They were doing it through the water supply. They were doing it through the food that people are eating. And I still think that happens to this day. And I feel like we just can't do anything. But yeah, even after the 1970s, this experiment still wasn't stopped. In this humane study, it's a stark example of how the medical community, with the backing of the government, used African Americans as human guinea pigs without their consent of knowledge. So another one was the secret radiation testing and the human guinea pigs, 1940s through 1970s. In the mid-20th century, the U.S. government conducted a series of radiation exposure experiments on civilians without their consent. One of the most disturbing of these projects was Shipboard Hazard and Defense, called SHAD, which exposed military personnel to dangerous levels of radiation to test the effects of radiological warfare. The U.S. government used soldiers as human guinea pigs, testing atomic weapons by detonating them in remote locations and monitoring the soldiers' health post-exposure. Some of the radiation tests were carried out with radioactive iodine and cesium-137, which led to dangerous levels of radioactive contamination. It's just like, on your own soldiers? Well, really? Okay. The biological warfare testing in Panama, 1950s through 1960s. In the 1950s and 1960s, the U.S. government tested biological warfare agents in Panama as part of an ongoing series of biological weapons experiments. Aerosolized pathogens, including Q fever and tularemia, were released into the air to see how they would spread through urban populations. The testing took place in civilian areas, and the people of Panama were not informed that they were being exposed to dangerous biological agents. Many of the residents suffered long-term health effects, including respiratory issues and immune system failures. The U.S. government kept the details of these experiments classified for many years, and it wasn't until the 1990s that the full scope of these tests were revealed. In 1940 through 1970s, you had the guinea pig children. One of the most disturbing chapters of U.S. experimentation involved the use of children as human guinea pigs for various experiments in the 1940s through 1970s. These children, often from poor and marginalized backgrounds, were used in experiments involving radiation exposure, vaccine testing, and toxic substances. Exposed to radiation in order to study its effects on human growth and development. In another experiment, children with disabilities were injected with live polio viruses without their consent as part of vaccine trials. The children who survived these experiments were often left with long-term health problems, and their suffering was ignored by those conducted the research. These experiments were justified under the guise of protecting the public, but they were deeply unethical and resulted in the trauma and deaths of many innocent children. In 1950 through 1960, you had the radiation testing on soldiers and civilians in Nevada. During the 1950s and 1960s, the U.S. government conducted a series of nuclear tests at the Nevada test site, which included the exposure of soldiers and civilians to radioactive fallout. Operation Teapot 1955 and others tests involved detonating nuclear bombs in close proximity to military personnel who were forced to march and carry out military exercises in the fallout zone to study the effects of nuclear radiation on human bodies. The military personnel were not adequately warned of the dangers of radiation, and many developed serious health issues like cancer, respiratory diseases, and birth defects in their children. In addition to the soldiers, nearby civilian populations in Las Vegas and surrounding areas were exposed to fallout from these tests. Many suffered from radiation sickness and died years later from cancers related to their exposure. The secret testing of chemical and biological weapons in the U.S. public, 1950s through 1970s. The covert experiments involving the release of chemical and biological agents in various public locations, including subway stations, public buildings, and neighborhoods. The goal was to assess how chemical and biological agents could be used in warfare and how they would spread in populated urban environments. One of the most infamous tests was the release of bacteria and chemical agents in the New York subway system in the 1960s, which exposed thousands of civilians to dangerous pathogens without their knowledge. In one incident, Bacillus subtilis, A potentially deadly bacteria was released into the subway air in New York, causing respiratory issues in many people. Similar experiments were also conducted in San Francisco and in Washington, D.C., with the public being kept completely unaware of the risk involved. These secret tests only came to light decades later when government documents were declassified. So, that's really all the experiments I want to go over. There's so much more. And actually, before I continue, I want to actually read this document from the CIA page. It was called The Invisible Third World War, and it was one of the first documents. I don't even know how I came across it. Like last year, I was literally looking at something completely different. I think I was looking at NASA stuff, and I just came across this. And this document is honestly crazy. I'm just going to try to skim through it because it's so much stuff real quick. So one of the titles on this document is called Chemical and Biological Warfare, The Secret Plagues. Governments do experiments on their own citizens. In the Soviet Union, the victims never get a chance to talk about it. But in a supposedly free society, if they are left in good enough shape to remember that they have been victimized, citizens can not only talk about it, they can even sue their government. A wide range of invisible warfare experiments conducted on unwitting citizens by the United States government has already been exposed. CIA Army team infected Americans with deadly germs from 1949 to 1969. Equipped with nasal filters and other protective gear, these clandestine agents targeted civilian populations in Hawaii, Alaska, New York, Florida, and California with experimental biological weapons. Using trick suitcases and a 1954 Mercury equipped with dual mufflers and extended tailpipes, the spooks cast their clouds of plague along 4 New York City turnpikes and through the commuter-choked Lincoln and Holland tunnels. Attacks on Florida were followed by an epidemic of whooping cough in which 12 persons died. In 1950, a secret biological warfare blanketed weapon launched from a Navy vessel blanketed San Francisco Bay. 30 years later, on learning of the experiment, victims responded with angry lawsuits against the government. Government agents have injected thousands of unsuspecting Americans with germs such as syphilis, and similar incidents have occurred in Britain and the Soviet Union. Now that formerly secret biological warfare documents have been released, nearly after 30 years, at least part of the grisly story can be told. And let me just see what else is on here about it. Microbiological Holocaust. Warriors have been busy developing biological warfare weapons since the prehistoric days when shamans first poisoned their enemies. The memory of the political use of disease during the Crusades and the Inquisition may have been too fresh in Hitler's mind to allow him to unleash the vast arsenal amassed by Nazi scientists. The Japanese, however, had no such compunctions. After World War II, germ warfare trials were held which convicted a number of their war criminals. Those trials, even more sensational than the Nuremberg trials, got little attention from the press on that day. Biological warfare was next used during the Korean War, and then it was used in Vietnam. Perhaps the most hideous story is that of the leakage of anthrax germs from weapons in the remote secret city of Semipalatinsk in the Soviet Union. There, just a few years ago, hundreds died in horrible agony from anthrax germs created from the purpose of biological warfare. Current genetic developments in what is called recombinant DNA threaten to unleash mutant biological warfare strains from which the world may never recover. Despite an international treaty forbidding the use of biological warfare, some nations today are cheating, using it anyway. According to recently released Pentagon documents, the Soviets may well have used both chemical and biological warfare weapons in Afghanistan. The Rocky Mountain Plague. When the news of secret leaking Army wet-eye nerve gas canisters in Denver, Colorado was released, it sent shivers through the citizens of the mile-high city. Would Denver be America's first Semipalatinsk? A controversy over how to dispose of the nerve gas bombs has raged over the past few years in Utah and Colorado. Okay, I just thought it was important to share some information off that document because this one is honestly crazy. There's multiple pages, and once again, it's called The Invisible Third World, and it just talks about how they were releasing so many germs, and how all of these diseases really are man-made. And when I talk to people about this stuff, people automatically dismiss it, and I get it. I was once there too. But there is so much facts, and well, I'm not going to say facts because it is kind of hard to find this stuff. Anytime you go straight to Google and try to find this stuff, it automatically pops up as conspiracies, and it'll give you a whole bunch of facts on, how vaccines have improved lives and how these numbers have went down. And I'm just here to tell you that it's going to say that. That is how propaganda works. There's only two companies in this world that run and control every single thing in our world: BlackRock, Vanguard. Who do you think controls the media, what you see online? And, I'm so grateful for the FOIA Act and us being able to request documents and to have all of these documents that were written in the 1900s, the 1800s, and that are just now being released after the 2000s. I find it mind-boggling. And yeah, I kind of just wanted to talk about the different experiments and open people's minds to the fact that, I really think that's how COVID came about. I think that's how so many of these things that we deal with, out of nowhere, everybody just starts to get pneumonia, all these different things, and we have to follow the money. How much money does these pharmaceutical companies make? How much money do these vaccine companies make? We just have to understand that it is deeper than what we think. It is a spiritual warfare going on, has been for a very, very long time. I don't know the facts on what I think these vaccines do to us. I just know that I don't think it is natural, and that that's what we should be doing. And yeah, I hope that I was able to share some experiments maybe that you haven't heard before. Maybe open your mind up a little bit to how maybe we should put a hold on, get putting the shots in us for a while, and maybe put a hold on giving our babies that stuff. And, to each their own. I'm never here to judge. I don't care what people do in their own life. I'm simply here trying to give my perspective, things that I find. And yeah, so if you enjoyed today's video, please like and subscribe. If you stayed and watched this long, I'm super, super grateful. Y'all know me. I love when people comment or like and just give me insight or information, their opinion, honestly, anything, a little smiley face, whatever. It truly does make my day. But yeah, make sure you subscribe. If you're not following me on TikTok, go do that. I post every single day. It's much easier over there. It's Ashley Eckerly with an underscore. And yeah, I hope y'all have a great week. Go dive into some experiments. I'm going to link the documents below. So be sure to go check those out. Do your own research on it. Come back, comment, let me know what you think. Let me know, comment about maybe a bunch of experiments that I missed that are way worse than this. I love to get down to the nitty-gritty of the worst ones. I don't know why. It's not that I enjoy reading that stuff. I just think that it's so important to be knowledgeable and to understand the truth of what really happens and what has happened, right? And I think so much of our history and past is covered up. And one thing I want to talk about real quick is, a long time ago, one of the biggest investments that the Rothschilds ever invested in was their own business, or it was the Rockefellers, one of the two families. I don't know, they're the same basically. But anyways, I think one controls the bank, one the other. But the things that they invested in was education, right? So our school systems, everything we know now is made by those people. Who do you think is on the board? Who do you think writes the curriculum? Another thing that was the medical industry, which is what I wanted to really talk about. And, back then they had these herbalist hospitals, and they had hospitals where people would do the natural route, and people look at that stuff now as crazy. But during that time, they hired a guy named Abraham Flexner, and he was to write the new medical report on how people were to learn and what they were able to teach, and how hospitals and what they basically had to abide by to get your license to even be able to be a nurse or any of these things. And he was very much hired by the Rockefellers. And, we have to be wary about this stuff, and we have to know this kind of stuff to understand how everything maybe is a lie that we've been told, right? And Another one of the things that they invested in was science. Another one of the things that they invested in was global warming. I think global warming is a scam, a lie. Not to say that I don't think we're over consuming and we need to stop with the plastic and all these things. We need to stop with the cutting down trees. But I think that there's this huge agenda being pushed with all that stuff. And, now I'm getting a bit off topic, but it really is important to dive into all of that stuff. Without knowing all of that stuff, without diving into these experiments that I'm talking about, you'll automatically hear somebody say something about vaccines negatively and you'll dismiss it. And that is why it is so important to just go do your own research, right? If I didn't cover anything that opened up your mind or made you think differently about it, please, there is so much to uncover, so many different books written about this stuff that I didn't even tackle on. Way before I was even born, people talking about this stuff, right? It isn't new age, and I know that's a huge thing that we think. But yeah, all right. I hope you guys have a great week, and yeah.